My name is Tabiso Mohapi, an LGBTI activist.
Tabiso is one of the many South Africans living openly as a gay activist. He says reconciliation rings hollow due to the stigma attached to gay people.
Rural areas, villages, to be specific, it's one challenge where our communities are challenged and they are not recognized and their rights are not respected. The traditional leaders, the traditional council, and the community at large, they still don't respect their rights, and they still do not recognize their existence within the community.
In December 2005, South Africa became the first African continent and the fifth in the world to recognize the rights of same-sex couples. But the LGBTIQ+ community says, despite all these progressive policies, they still face discrimination. Reconciliation for them will only have meaning once hate crimes and violence is stopped.
I personally do not see ourselves near reconciling. Maybe that reconciliation is there somewhere else. It's a long way to go. And again, there is more awareness that needs to be done in our communities.
The community says reconciliation means embracing the changing world and discarding stereotypes. Bafedile Mwerani, SABC News, Potchefstroom.
All right, let's take this discussion a little further. We now have in studio Steve Letsike, who's the Executive Director from Access Chapter 2. Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the programme.
Good afternoon, thank you so much.
So just watching that story there, it seems as if this battle continues 25 years on. People from the LGBT communities continue to feel marginalised and even persecuted, I'd say.
Yeah, no, indeed. I mean, these stories are real, particularly because discrimination and stigma still prevails in our communities, but it's also fueled by quite a number of issues and challenges, and some of the social norms that continues to be maintained in society. When you look at the whole lot of religious bigotry, you look at cultural norms that we've maintained without acknowledging the standards of humanity in our elements of existence.
So during the struggle against apartheid, I think the focus was on vote and democracy, and in many ways the issue of LGBT was hidden and not really considered at the time. Come plus 1994, of course everybody now must enjoy their rights. Would you say that that's when it became more evident just how marginalised the community was?
Not necessarily, because you have people who stood up even prior to 94, prior to 80s, people like Simon Nkoli, people like Phumi Mthethwa, who were part of the struggle. Simon Nkoli was in the treason trial, who, when he was in prison, clearly spoke out and said, I'm black, and I'm gay, and I will not separate my struggle. And part of it is to understand the intersections of existence, that I can be black, I can be a woman, I can be gay, I can be Christian, and so forth. And it's very important to underpin those intersections. I think it was not necessarily one of the big issues in terms of marginalization in a way that, where struggle are isolated. Struggle was a struggle. Women were, out there and struggling for balancing the gender dynamics that exist in society. You had the issues of race. You still had the issues of same-sex practicing persons being identified. So everyone was fighting for freedom and for equality, and it did not matter which struggle was it.
So today is the day of reconciliation, and I wonder, the LGBTI struggle, how does that fit into this reconciliation story? Because some people might say, but hang on, my understanding of reconciliation, and then they think of 94 and democracy, but it is an area for you.
Well, I think because of our long history of prejudice, Peter, it's very important to understand that LGBTI persons have been compromised, have been neglected, have been silenced, and some of this silence have costed life. I mean, we live in a country which has democracy for over 25 years, I mean, with a constitution that is celebrated globally. However, it's not necessarily a lived reality for all. So when we speak about reconciliation, it means that we need to repair the injustices of the past. Where LGBTI lives have been put and have been on stake, we cannot afford to have more lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender person dying. We cannot have people being discriminated, being isolated, excluded. One, we need to realize that human rights is a privilege by virtue of being human. And that means everyone has to have access to their rights.
So how do we fix this? I mean, how do we change this attitude? It's taken a long time, even in the US. It's only in recent years you start to see more and more LGBTI characters on our screens in movies, but even that was a long journey.
Heterosexuals have to stop wanting to control people's bodies. People, really, it's about respecting human beings regardless of sexual orientation and gender identity. I mean, our constitution says that. But also what's important, education is very key. I find it quite interesting that a lot of people do not understand human sexuality. You know, when you speak human sexuality, people start to think, oh, it's only heterosexuals. No, you do have homosexuals, bisexuals, and so forth. So if we educate ourselves, if we create more awareness, but also we cannot want to do it in a cost where we see quite a lot of people being excluded in society. I think it's very important. When we start to look at diversity, when we start to look at law enforcement, you know, we cannot afford 74% of LGBTI young people being excluded or discriminated at education level. It's unacceptable. So I really do think there are certain things that must be acted upon, but also there are certain things that we need to work around as society. But religious groups must be accountable. Traditional groups must be accountable because they also are key in what is happening around homophobia. So
what do you say to people say, but it's not our culture?
Well, I think whose culture is it? Because, I mean, as a black African lesbian woman myself, whose culture are we talking about? I'm a Tswana girl. And if we're talking about where I'm born here. I'm not born in America. I'm not born in UK. This is who I am, and this is the only soil that I know, which is the African soil. And I think it's important that every child must know that if people come and say it's an African, who defines African if I do not define African by being myself, being born here and raised here? So it's very important to always look at education even towards LGBTI persons so that they can be resilient for those who are prone to say that.
Yeah. Steve, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks so much indeed for coming through and just adding, you know, more thoughts on this very important day from another lens. Thanks so much indeed.
Thank you.